Hi, I'm Eric, and welcome to Beyond the Belt. This is a conversation with Christian Pierce, a black belt out of New Jersey, USA, currently living in Zurich, Switzerland. He also has a black belt in Hoteikan Jiutjitsu. Christian is a researcher, lecturer, and PhD candidate in organizational studies and cultural theory. He's a U.S. Army veteran and graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. I hope you enjoy our chat.
Chris or Christian, which would you prefer?
Either or, whatever you're comfortable with, I'm happy.
All right, I'll go with Christian. Tell me, what was it like for you to get your black belt?
Yeah, it was really a cool experience. I mean, that feels so long ago. I just got my second stripe in November, but I had finished my master's degree in Brazil. So I'd lived in Rio for 2 years and then Sao Paulo for a year and just had moved back to the States and then was pivoting to Switzerland and looking, to pursue a PhD here. So having been this, at the time, 5.5 year, 4-stripe brown belt who'd been traveling the world, Enzo was cool enough to bring me back under the RGA flag because when I got out of the Army, had started there. I taught kids classes for a bit, substituting for Arlie Flanagan. It was really just kind of this timing where it was like, hey, you can't keep traveling and go off again and be stuck in another gym where you have to go through the ropes and then, the professor's saying, oh, brother, just keep training. You're almost there. But, one more year, just stay with us one more year, which happened like 3 or 4 times in the past. Yeah, he gave the approval for it, and he was actually had to go to Abu Dhabi at the time before I was leaving, and so Igor Gracie handed me my black belt in November 2019, and that was really, really cool because I got it the same day as one of my good friends, Rafi Garcia, who's just like, he's a turtle. He's like a really, really good guy, but really tough on the mats. And so that was a really cool experience because he was also one of the first people I met when I started training at RGA. And so having that black belt title, like I had already gotten a black belt in Hoteikan Jiutjitsu, the classical jiu-jitsu and judo, but having that Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt was just like really like I made it to the top of the mountain, and now it's time to continue helping other people get there as well.
When just jumping back and forth between gyms and not being promoted, like the just one more year thing, did that give you a different definition of what black belts should be? Or were you just like, no, I know exactly what a black belt should be and I feel like I'm there and I just need somebody to agree?
It's a great question because I could turn it around and ask you the same thing. Like there's so much subjectivity to what it means to be a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu versus Judo, for example, that it was kind of hard to figure out outside of technical ability. Like, what does it really mean? Like, how do you know someone is really at that black belt level? Because I've gone to gyms where you have blue or purple belts who are monsters on the mat, who are beating everybody, but they don't get a black belt. And then you have people who are black belts and you're like, this person really, did they really train? And they're showing like some wazoo stuff, like, a 360 wrist lock from Aikido. And you're like, you legit, or did you watch a couple YouTube videos? But in my own personal journey as well, I was like a 6-year white belt. So hearing that over and over again over the years of like, oh, just keep going, you kind of just don't care when you hear that because it makes the journey more about your own personal pursuit and improvement rather than the validation from other people.
So it's interesting. I don't think I really thought about it in the way that I'm about to say it until just now because of the way you asked the question. I agree that there's a massive difference in black belts, and I think there are brown belts at my gym that are better than me, and I probably will never be better than them. But I don't think that a black belt necessarily needs to be the best, and I've never thought that. I've always thought through all of the different martial arts that I've trained at that a black belt is somebody who has been around something for a long time, has experience, and is an expert in that thing. And that doesn't mean that they're an expert in everything, but it means that they can integrate knowledge into that thing. And so and that's my general thesis of somebody who's an expert. And so when I apply that to jiu-jitsu, I was an all-American wrestler, which means that I can integrate grappling really, really well, but it doesn't mean that I was able to integrate gi jiu-jitsu as easily. And that took me a lot longer to do. And now when I think about what I expect of a black belt, or what I look at other black belts as having the ability to do, it's integrating knowledge into their game and being able to assess that through the lens of how it works against somebody else, which is not a very high bar, but that's the technical side of it. The non-technical side for me is I don't think that people who are bad people in general should be getting black belts, because then they're representative of the person who receives it, which might be a bit like political, but given everything going on in the jiu-jitsu world right now, I stand by that. For example, I don't think I personally would never give somebody who's like a Nazi or a white supremacist, I would not be giving them a black belt if that's my choice. Just because they're technically qualified doesn't mean they're engendering the kind of culture that I think should exist. But if they can integrate the skills, they've technically passed the test. That's just my personal opinion.
Which is interesting. So I have a question before I share my thoughts on that. Yeah. Would you consider yourself, given what you said about being a black belt, would you consider yourself an expert?
Yeah, actually I would. I don't think an expert has to know everything, but I also think an expert is able to very clearly articulate what they don't know. And that doesn't mean that they can't learn it. One of the things that I do to answer your question is I teach 3 classes a week, and the third class I always do is a Q&A. Like I teach the same thing in gi and same-ish thing gi and no gi. When I can't do it, if it's a gi choke, you can't do it no gi, like just generally speaking. But I try to teach the same thing, and then on Thursday I ask people what their questions are, and then we do that. Right? It's like I did that with Denny Propakos like 15 years ago, and I was like, this is brilliant. If I ever teach jiu-jitsu, I will do this. Because I think people need help integrating some of the problems that they're having, and they can't always wait for the class. So it's somebody's like, I'm really struggling with this scissor sweep. How do I do it? And we talk about loading and framing and whatever. I got asked like a couple weeks ago, I'm really struggling with my Kiss of the Dragon. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm not the person to help you with that. I can look it up. And then the immediate next question was, I need help with a buggy choke. And I was like, also not going to be my skill set from my build. But I looked it up. We worked on their buggy choke after class. I was able to fix their buggy choke, but it's still not a move that I can do. And therefore, I sort of say I am an expert because I can assess that. I can fix it, even if that's not something that I can easily integrate into my game just because of body type, which is a very long answer to your question.
Well, just as a quick follow-up, if you didn't have the black belt, would you still consider yourself an expert?
Yeah. I don't think you need to have a black belt to be an expert, and I don't think having the black belt makes you an expert. I think black belt is external validation. A good example of that is I don't have a black belt in wrestling. They don't give belts. I was an All-American. I have a massive, I've forgotten more about wrestling than most people will ever know. I'm still an expert, and I don't even need the external validation.
And that external validation is exactly what I was thinking about, how a lot of people will see us as experts because of the belt and not, necessarily because of the skill set we bring. There's that confirmation bias. Oh, this person has a black belt, therefore they must be good. Rather than, oh, this purple belt, or back in the day especially, like, oh, this purple belt is really an expert, even though they're just a purple belt. I mean, now with social media, I think that's gotten diluted because anybody can put stuff out there and make it seem like, they really know something. You've got white belts putting out like technique videos on TikTok and Instagram.
I think that's hilarious.
But I mean, you want to applaud them in a way, but it's also, the blind leading the blind. to use, if that analogy is appropriate to use, or Plato's allegory of the cave, like someone who's made it barely to the next phase of the cave, going back into the people who are restrained, trying to teach them something. Yeah. It's also, I think, that issue, going back to also what you're saying about culture and standards, like who deserves to have a black belt, especially with what's going on in jiu-jitsu. Even today, there's even more stuff being put out on Instagram. What values determine whether or not someone not only has that expertise with performing the techniques, but also embodies the cultural values of being a black belt? And I think that's where we could call it the evolution of jiu-jitsu from judo has taken away from those cultural values, or really like Jigoro Kano's original idea of maximum efficient use of energy, and then mutual benefit, like mutual well-being, where we want to help each other grow. And even though we do that in jiu-jitsu, there's not really this codified value set within each and every academy. And I think that's also because anybody can open up a jiu-jitsu school. Like, I've got way too many, I think, here in Zurich and Winterthur in Switzerland, because anybody with money, they find a space on the mats, they pop open a gym, call it grappling, say they've got classes, throw up some Instagram and a website, maybe bring in somebody for a seminar, and then there's that validation, rather than having really a formulated plan or criteria that come from a governing body. And I think, even though there's corruption in the Olympics, with judo being an Olympic sport, you have that in comparison to jiu-jitsu. You don't really have that. Yeah, you have certified black belts from the IBJJF, where, IBJJF, given what's going on, has put out statements. You have certified schools, but there's no real objectivity or
this is why I like Belt Checker. This is why I like what Christian Graugart did with Belt Checker, because it does a little bit of this. It does a little bit of the here, is this person a fake black belt, or is this person a real black belt? Like, if you've rolled with them. And I think that social proof has real value in the absence of a standards body. And I don't think that the standards body is the right answer, at least my personal opinion. I think social proof, right? Jiu-jitsu is based on, does this work or doesn't it?
Which is interesting, because I had that talk. I'm going to throw out Alec Balding's name here, because he's been one of my, I think, the oldest jiu-jitsu friend I've had back in the day in Georgia.
Are brilliant. His videos are brilliant. Excellent explainer. I've never met him
in
person, but brilliant.
I hope you guys get the chance. He needs to do another European trip. But, we were talking about this a couple weeks ago with Christian. Because of everything he's done in jiu-jitsu in general, I wouldn't have gotten really to stay in Rio, Connection Rio, if it hadn't been for him helping out at the beginning with Gringos there. But the IBJJF cutting off Globetrotters as an organization and then going into Belt Checker, I think that social proof is really cool. But at the same time, if I'm well known in the jiu-jitsu community, for example, you see these influencers that have 10, 20, 50,000 followers. Yeah, people may or may not know them personally, but they'll probably be able to say, oh, this person is a blue belt or a purple belt, brown, black, so forth. Where if you have somebody who might be very legitimate but not well known, you might have a couple people, or maybe in their gym, if they sign up on Belt Checker, who are able to say, oh, this person is definitely that. But are we looking, at quantity versus quality on Belt Checker, compared to, I think, having, this criteria of objectivity and defining what it really means to be at a certain belt level?
I think you're conflating a few ideas here, and I'm going to get a little pedantic, because social proof, you can graph social proof, right? You can say, if this person says and this person says, and that means that this person's knowledge is objectively useful to gauge this other person, and you can use confidence intervals. You can use distance lengths. You can calculate that if you really want to. And look, I helped Christian build Belt Checker. So I now that we're talking about it, I probably should go back and put a confidence score based on the people and whatever. I think that's an interesting thing. I'm going to make a mental note to do that after we're done here. But I think you can do that. And I think that there's real value in that social proof because social proof can be tested. Like, I think the other thing that you're conflating here is that the lack of social proof means something. And I think that, like, if there's no social proof, that doesn't mean the person's good or bad. But I think so having that social proof legitimizes the gym to some extent. And if somebody trains at a gym and there's enough social proof at that gym and they're not on Belt Checker or whatever social proof body there is, that doesn't mean that they're not at that level. I think you can, by extrapolation, say, yeah, they're probably at that whatever level they say they're at because they train at this gym and this gym has X number of people who are at that level.
So what about Derek Moneyberg in that situation?
I know absolutely not enough to have an intelligent conversation about this. I do my best to stay out of some of these things. And sometimes I find out about them based out of academic interest, but in this case, I don't have enough information to speak on it.
So I'll share my thoughts on it because I think it goes with my own conflation of something like Belt Checker, where you have Moneyberg, he sells these courses, he's got way more. Actually, he blocked me on Instagram. He sent me a message like saying thanks for the shout out because I had a fairly neutral opinion of him getting his black belt and I tagged him. So he sent me this message and then afterwards blocked me. And I was like, that feels so personal. But you look at someone like him who's got all these followers. He now has, world champions saying that, yes, this guy's a black belt. So he's got, the numbers and quantity or that social proof, plus you could say quality in looking at those who have said, oh, this guy's a black belt. But what would it really be like to roll with him? Would he really be rolling at that black belt level? And I think that's where some people have said yes. You look at the video evidence, it doesn't necessarily look like that. But having those objective standards, I think, mitigates situations like that. And you could say, okay, Moneyberg is an outlier because he's got the money to have all these privates and fly in people and train that way. But then how do we understand if a hobbyist is training? And they're really good hobbyists. Like, what are the criteria then in comparison to someone like Moneyberg? Should there be different criteria? Or should it just, going back to something like Belt Checker, is just having that proof, because this person is training, is that fine enough?
I think there's an implicit question that you're talking about here, which is what is the minimum standard? And I think the problem with having a minimum standard is, like, let me take a bit of an extreme example of if there's somebody who I used to train with at Marcelo Garcia's who had one leg. I don't remember his last name, Kareem something. We were blue belts together. And so there's an easy question there, like, can you be as good a black belt as the baseline black belts if you're missing a limb? Like, there are people who will have strong opinions on that. I absolutely think that his style would make it difficult to be high level, but I think he was really good. And probably if he continued, I don't know, I haven't spoken to him in years. He absolutely could be a black belt, and he will be a different style of black belt than people who have two legs, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think that if you put a minimum standard in that he may not be able to meet, you're taking away his ability to do that, right? In a less extreme example, if somebody is just much older and their body doesn't work in the same way, like if they're 70s or 80s, maybe they can't do barambolos at 70 or 80. Does that make them less of a black belt because they can't perform if you roll with them? I think the problem with minimum standard is that to some extent it's almost like an ableist version of this. And that's why I think about it through the lens of integration, because it's in a non-ableist way. If somebody's missing a limb or blind or older or, like what can they do with the integrating of their knowledge, and how does it work if somebody else asks them a question? Can they extrapolate? Because to me, that satisfies the criterion.
Which is interesting, because I think of that phrasing, jujitsu is for everybody. And what I think when you have criteria is not necessarily something that's exclusionary. For example, going back to what you're saying about this guy from Marcelo Garcia's, like this is martial arts, this is jiu-jitsu, where it is adaptable, where someone, depending on their body size, type, ability, will adapt techniques to fit them. Going back to Berimbolo, I hate Berimbolos. I think,
Same.
especially in Nogi, like I'm gonna take your leg if you try and Berimbolo when you're training or competing against me. But in having, similar to what I do when I teach my courses at the university, having objective criteria, but there's room within that criteria. And I remember, like, I actually was told that my jiu-jitsu is older than my grandmother, or older than someone's grandmother. I won't say the name of the professor at the time, but the first time I tested for my blue belt, I didn't get it. And it was interesting because of that comment, but it was while I was doing judo, and I'd gone from West Point, where I was in college down to Atlanta to visit family, hang out, and then people were like, oh, Christian needs his blue belt. So in this blue belt exam were like criteria like demonstrate 3 ways to pass the guard or 3 submissions from side mount, certain things like that. And I think when you have something a bit more open, where it is general, it's not specifically saying, oh, demonstrate like Kiss of the Dragon. It allows for that room. And it's the same thing, I think, when you look at, going back to university and teaching, university policies, where if you have someone that has a unique ability or special needs, that you are creating that adaptation to include them so that they can succeed. And so I don't think it's creating a minimum baseline to exclude, but just having a general standard of criteria. So, if we show up at a new gym and we see 5 black belts, we generally know, like, okay, what these black belts know, and also, what they represent, what type of culture. And I think that's kind of where that piece is needed, like that governing body, going back to the example you were using, like, neo-Nazis. Like I've gone into, we know that jiu-jitsu is, and martial arts in general, do attract a more conservative crowd. But, I've gone into gyms where it is like outright xenophobia and racism and homophobia. And these are not gyms that I would say are representative of what jiu-jitsu should be. But people have the ability and the freedom to open up these types of schools in today's current climate. And so that's where I think having that it creates the quality that's needed to maintain some type of homogenous culture, rather than having gyms, pop up and represent whatever culture their leader or their instructor believes in.
I have a hard time like coming down on a specific side here, because there's a part of me that wants people with almost any culture that they want to be able to open a gym and create the kind of culture they want, right? But I also then am like, the almost is there for a reason, and then you end up like, who should judge that, right? Who should be allowed to judge that? Because it has to represent a certain set of biases, criteria, etc. One thing that jumped out at me earlier that you said that I think is also really important is that one of the criteria I use to judge if someone's a black belt as well is, can they control themselves? Like in a role, can they be calm if somebody else is not calm? Or do they have to match and amp everything up? Not can they match. I expect that, right? Anybody can go crazy. but can they like be able to change levels and be able to be calm and if somebody's going crazy? Like that's not a thing that I expect every belt to be able to do. But if I roll with a black belt who can't calm down, then my first question internally is almost always, who the hell gave this person their black belt? And I've had that question since I was a white belt.
You know, when you first started talking, I was definitely thinking about control. But then as you continued, I started to think about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which, you know, we've seen like the memes now comparing jiu-jitsu belt levels to that. And I was like, I was talking about that way before Reddit was around. But I think that is key, not just that control, but there's a humility that comes in as well. Yes, there's definitely times where you have to be like the mat enforcer if someone isn't displaying respect or reciprocating respect. But other times where, you know, there's this time in Rio de Janeiro that was hilarious where I just popped into a gym that I had always wanted to visit for the first time. And it was a day after my flight, like I was still a bit jet lagged, and there were a few people who were like trying to go, like some brown and black belts who were trying to go like really, really hard. So the first few rounds, I saw that, and so I matched it, and then later on I was like, I'm tired. Like this is really tiring. Do I keep trying to match them, or do I just like chill out? Because sometimes the best defense is to tap, and if I tap, I can just start over. So there was one round where I just like, I saw the kid had fire in his eyes, and I just started laughing, which tends to make people madder because they don't understand why you're laughing. And I just tapped like the whole round. I was like, oh, he gets me in something. Like before I feel anything, just
yeah,
because no one's going to take away the black belt. But I think what's interesting is it's in a way like an anime when you see those characters. Like I think I'm watching My Hero Academia right now, and Deku like shifts it into like second gear, then third, fourth, fifth, and I see that in jiu-jitsu as well, where it becomes automatic. Where as a black belt, like you have your different gears, and I know like if I'm rolling with white belts, certain white belts, most white belts, I'll say. I won't try and make an absolute statement or generalize, but I'm never going to go out of like first gear.
Yeah.
And that's just like, it's not even, I'm consciously thinking of it. I'm just, hey, this is where I'm going to go. And then if they start to increase, like I'll match it, or maybe go a bit higher just if they need to. But you know, what do either of us get out of that if I'm always rolling up here and they're rolling down here? And unfortunately that's not in enough gyms, that type of mentality, even with black belts, because I've gone to places and people have been really surprised. Or you get that kid who's like, oh, I want to roll with a black belt. Nowadays I'll just straight up say no. But I used to like be like, all right, come on. Like, and then I hear him say, oh, well, that roll, that wasn't as tough as I thought it'd be. And then you're like, all right, let's go again. Like, you know, if you really,
I'll just let them go. I'll let them think I'm worse than I am. We've been dancing around something for the last 20 minutes, and I really want to talk about it before we shift off of jiu-jitsu. It's community, because I spend a lot of time on these episodes talking about community with people, but you've not found the kind of community you're looking for in Switzerland. And so I want to ask, like, what kind of community are you looking for, and what's missing, do you think, from this culture of Swiss jiu-jitsu that makes finding community difficult for you?
Yeah. I'm reflecting on like all my 22 years of jiu-jitsu now. When I think about what is really community for me within jiu-jitsu, it's similar to the feeling I had with my soldiers in the military. It's that bond where you have an identity regardless of unit or branch of service, but you can come together and you know that there's been shared experiences and you can empathize and support each other. And in most places I've trained, I mean, I think about countries I've been in where you pop into a school just one or two times, and then you've got like lifelong friends. Like I've only trained, unfortunately, at this point, like once at Henzo Gracie Cape Town, but I have a lot of respect for everybody there, and every now and then I'll send them messages or keep in touch through social media, and it's just that camaraderie, which is really special. And I think that does, once again, come from the leadership and the culture that is created. In Switzerland, I've mainly trained on the Swiss-German side. And, you look at a country that has 4 official languages, like 3 main cultural regions. And so the Swiss-German side is fairly different than the French side. I like going over to the French side. I've only trained a bit there, but what I have seen, going back to Plato's allegory of the cave, there was 1 or 2 that's kind of up for debate, like which schools really started first. But let's say, going by the common knowledge here, that there was 1 school that really started, and everybody who started jiu-jitsu in Zurich was under that 1 school. And many of those people split and opened other schools. And then a few people came in externally. But for the most part, the schools that split off recreated the culture from that gym because they haven't been outside the cave. So they haven't seen what things really should look like. And rather than getting out and, even I know people who've attended Globetrotter camps and, getting out and being outside and really saying, okay, we need to stay outside. They then come back and they conform once again to the cave. And so what that has done, when we look at the culture in the Swiss-German side, it's created a number of fractures where it's a lot of unhealthy competition rather than competitive collaboration and saying, hey, let's really get the jiu-jitsu scene here in a great shape or a great way. A lot of gyms only, if they have a black belt, have like 1 or 2. And so it becomes this really vertical hierarchy where the egos have not been broken down in a way where you go to Henzo's or Alliance or Nova Union, and you've got 30 to 40 black belts. And so black belt's a dime a dozen. And so you can just really integrate and connect with people in a way that doesn't require this pecking order. And that's actually one of the things I've seen too as a black belt. You come into a gym, especially like being Henzo Gracie black belt or being ex-military or, having this pedigree, competitions, judo black belt, all this stuff. And people put you on a pedestal, even though you don't necessarily want to be there, and you try and interact. And so there's that power distance that's created that breaks down the ability to really come together as a unit or that community in comparison to other places where you don't have that.
I think a lot of the stuff you said resonated in what I would look for in community. I think one of my favorite things about being an instructor at this point, like being a coach, is that I get to teach people what I think jiu-jitsu should look like, and not necessarily just moves, but also culture. And I'm very fortunate in that the gym that I'm teaching at has hundreds of students, and they're all people who like to travel and then bring that culture of, oh, my gym's like this. And I feel very grateful that I have the ability to bring that kind of attitude to people. And for me, it's really important to always remind people that if you don't like my way of doing it, that all that means is that you and I are not like in cultural alignment with jiu-jitsu. That doesn't mean my way's bad or your way's bad necessarily. It could. But there are 5, 6 other instructors here that have very different styles of jiu-jitsu, views on the community, views on a community, and operation on the mat, how they teach, how they learn, how they impart information, how they roll. And I would encourage all of you as students to like figure out what works best for you and find that. And if none of that is at this gym, go somewhere else, because you're spending your free time doing this. And you don't have to be dogmatically pulled into something that you don't agree with. All of that stuff that you said resonates with me. But what's fascinating to me is that you have been to enough gyms that in a local area that you cannot find that community in, which is really concerning.
Well, it goes back really to the ego amongst the instructors.
Yeah.
When I first got to Switzerland, it was kind of funny to see like the same routine at the gyms I was going to, where I would come in, send a message beforehand or pop in, and they would pair me up for the drilling with a white belt. They'd always pair me with a white belt. And I'd say, okay, like, happy to help. And then I'm giving basically a mini seminar within their class because talking to this white belt about, variations of the technique, just kind of letting my mind flow. And then what was interesting is they would then have me roll with that white belt for the first round of sparring. And so then the instructor would watch. And then it was like the second round, the instructor would be like, okay, let's go. Just like, man, really? Like, why are you doing this? Because I see what happens. You need to be
subjugated before you can. It's very militaristic, right?
Yeah.
You need to be broken down.
And so what happened, this happened 4 times. They would start to roll, and this is both gi and no gi, and I'd catch them in a toe hold. And the foot would pop. And I'm not trying to be the bad guy, I'm the visitor coming in, but these guys just were not tapping. And like one guy did say to me, like afterwards, because he got up and was like limping around, he's like, oh, I should have tapped. I was like, dude, well, this is jiu-jitsu. You're supposed to tap. Like my principles are safety and fun. And within safety is the concept of tapping. That is key because I need to trust that you're going to tap when you feel like you're at your limit. And then you need to trust me that when you tap, I'm going to let go. And so that was kind of the experience. And then I actually go to the University of St. Gallen, so that's outside of Zurich, and that it's a really cool program that has what they call Unisport, where university students can train jiu-jitsu for free externally. And that was I thought I had found that community, and that was such a cool place. But then one of the brown belt instructors and owners wasn't, I guess, happy that he was promoted to 4-stripe in the same time as like 3 or 4 other people, rather than getting his black belt. So he went to another gym and got his black belt and then came back and then basically split the school. And I'm like, I had a lot of discussions with the owner, and I was like, man, you see like what's going on. Like this guy is he's driving a wedge. He's created his own logo, and now the community is split. And the guy was like, no, he means well. He's just doing stuff to try and provide for his family. I was like, all right, whatever. I'm not going to worry about it. And then there's another school that was okay, but like, and this is kind of the thing. Actually, there are a lot of great people within the schools. Don't get me wrong. Like the students, I really enjoy. It's usually an issue at the top. And so like there was a school where it was cool, and the guy was like, hey man, can you teach no-gi once a week? I was like, yeah, I don't have a problem doing that. But then there was ego when rolling with him, and he was always like, dude, there's no way this guy's gonna beat me. And so talking about like those gears, he's a black belt though. So like I'm keeping it pretty high. But then I could just feel it wasn't the ability of the technique, it was just the ego and the attitude and trying to really want to force things. And it's like, no, like I'm gonna shut you down every time. And that just gets tiring. Rather than having like that.
When I roll with other black belts now, if I feel like their ego is taking over, I'll just let them have it. Like it does not matter to me. I'm in my 40s. I've been doing martial arts for 40 years. Like I will let people have it. And if they walk out of there thinking, well, that guy doesn't deserve his black belt, no, okay, I don't care. Like, doesn't bother me any, because I get to walk out of there safely. I get to walk out of there.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. I mean, if there's risk of injury, then absolutely. But, in this situation, there wasn't risk of injury either. But it was just, the day I showed up. So we had this agreement that I'm going to teach one no-gi class a week. So we set it up. And then I show up, and one of his other black belts is there. And she starts doing the warm-up. And I'm like, excuse me, you were there. We had this conversation. I'm teaching this class. She's like, no, I'm teaching it. And so I was like, all right, fine. Like, peace. I do teach no-gi once a week at a tech company in Zurich. And going back to what you said about teaching and being able to be in that environment and create like that culture and walk the talk. That's interesting and cool, because these are people who've maybe never even trained martial arts before. And so we've been doing that for now going on 4 years. And it's been a really interesting journey because it's only once a week. So how am I really teaching and training people who've never done anything before, but wanting to get more involved? And that's where I hate phrasing it this way, because we were doing it in judo and other martial arts beforehand, but taking the CLA ecological approach. And I've found some success with that in those classes. So that's been, kind of how here I've created a bit of my own community. I'm teaching a seminar tomorrow at a kickboxing school that I know, just to really, stay out there. And also because I like half guard, and with this whole debate on octopus guard and everything right now, I was like, hey, here's something I can contribute to. But really, it's maintaining that international community as well, having phone calls, keeping in touch with people on social media. Like I said, like Alec, I'm usually on Alec's live stream if I can make that, even though the time difference is a bit rough. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Let's talk a little bit about the PhD side of things, because I think that's really interesting. You're just to dive in, can you give a quick overview of what your PhD is on and how you got to choosing that? Because I think it ties really well into the community thing that we just talked about.
Absolutely. So my overarching PhD is in organization studies and cultural theory. And when I was brought into the University of St. Gallen, I was seen, and this goes back to what we were discussing about being an expert, I was seen as this anti-racism expert. And even though I have worked in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have a research background when it comes to cultural diversity and anti-racism, I never really saw myself in that box. However, when I started to focus on my dissertation, my initial proposal was to head to Brazil, because I had done my graduate school there, and the university has an office in Sao Paulo, and conduct my research interviewing non-managerial workers in companies, because I've created mentorship and reverse mentorship programs from companies. And similar to the military, you see that what the top says might not always be the reality on the ground. And usually if that's the case, it's because you've got some officers here who are changing those red blocks to green and lying on their PowerPoint. But, in businesses, it's usually a line manager here doesn't want to say the reality up here because they're fairly risk averse or worrying about their own job. Yeah. Exactly. So I contacted companies before getting down, and this was 2023 going into 2024, about conducting interviews. So most didn't respond. Those who did said no. It would look bad for us, which was like, okay, I get that. You definitely aren't where you need to be in a country that has the largest Afro-descendant population outside of Nigeria. So then I was on a research grant, and I was trying to figure out what I should do, because I need to do something. And going into this theme of community, I started to think about jiu-jitsu, because when I'm in Sao Paulo, like I've got my teams. You could call me a crianche. If they still use that, that's fine. But if I'm in Rio, I'm with Carlson Gracer, Novo Union. New York, I'm Henzo's. Sao Paulo, Alliance. And so every time I'm coming back to Alliance, everybody's saying welcome, like you're at home, you're with us, like tamo junto. And I was like, there's something about jiu-jitsu, and I think about Alliance as well because of the structure and the methodology that may be really interesting for a PhD project. And then I would just turn it into a case study and conduct interviews there. So I emailed Fabio Gurgel and was just like, hey, Fabio, what do you think about doing a case study for Alliance for my PhD? And he was like, hey, let's do it. So had like a 2-hour meeting with him and just talked a lot about business and human rights and DEI, ESG, and really how an organization like Alliance doesn't have those formal policies like a lot of companies do, but then there's that feeling of inclusion, of belonging amongst the teachers and the athletes. And so it's been a really neat project, hopefully coming to an end soon. But I was back in Sao Paulo and Rio last year and, competed as well, got a bit of the autoethnographical piece, which I used for another paper that's under review to be published outside of my dissertation. And just getting to talk to people, similar I think to what you do with the podcast. It's like getting to talk to people and just hear their stories and their perspectives and their experiences are so enriching. And so while I understand I need to write for my supervisor to ultimately just pass the PhD, it's also creating not just awareness through the words and experiences of others, but transferring that awareness to action. Because I think if you write, and there have been some great dissertations out there, don't get me wrong, but if you write something that remains in the ivory tower of academia, then what are you really doing it for if you can't really use that?
Can you
to
just
help
be
others?
a little bit specific? Like, what exactly are you trying to raise awareness of with the dissertation? Because I understand that, like, when you're writing a dissertation, there's this like tension between wanting to transform the thing you've learned about and finishing studying it so that it doesn't get lost in that transition. So like what is the assertion you're making here, the awareness you're bringing?
So the foundation and framework that I've created, which I'll tell you the official name once the dissertation is published, but right now, and I gave a presentation on it last week, I'm calling it the C5 framework, which is based off of the colors of our jiu-jitsu belts as well, with white being the foundation and that being connection, and then blue, that next level, being consent, purple being challenge, brown being credibility, and then at the top, care. And within that connection, what I was looking at, which was from business and human rights and now has really kind of shifted to the discourse on dignity and humanistic management, is really creating that foundation for why leaders should care and having that connection based off of the fact that, yes, we are all human, but also that mutual respect that should be had in the workplace. And then going into consent, and that's really where you look at within organizations consenting to certain rituals such as uniform policies or even the concept of the tap, which a lot of business leaders have found really compelling. It's setting those clear boundaries and that communication, and when you're getting to that point, being able to tap out, start over again.
One of the things that I think has been really interesting to understand or to show people is that a lot of people don't view consent as like the slap bump that when you're starting a round. And I've explained this to a couple of my like classes and individual students after classes. I'm like, when you do that slap bump, you're basically saying, hey, we're going to follow the standard rules. which are, if it's in this gym, no leg locks. If it's in another gym, there might be leg locks where I'm not going to go crazy, you're not going to go crazy, or we're both agreeing to go crazy. Like, there's all of these things, but this is consent. We are agreeing, we are starting, and oh, by the way, consent means when I tap or when you tap, we let go, and we don't just let go and throw it away, because if you're in a compromised position, you take care of the other person's safety to let them out of that thing in a gentle way. Like, all of these things are implicit in that slap bump. And I don't think that most people understand the implicit nature or the value of that. Maybe at all.
Absolutely. And that's another great ritual that you bring up, having that start and that end. And what's interesting is there are some good gyms that have a list of rules. And sometimes they don't really emphasize it, but a lot of coaches, like I was in Barcelona at Aranya, and it was really cool to hear them verbalize those rules before starting the roll. And so then when you have that nonverbal action of the slap and the fist bump, everyone has heard. And so you have to assume everyone's on the same page then in adhering to those rules. And then, end it. Another thing when we look at nonverbal actions in jiu-jitsu that I really do appreciate in the culture is and I know some gyms don't do it, but bowing before you go on and off the mat. But then once you bow, depending...
I've been doing that my whole life. I'm one of the few people in my gym who does it.
I can't not do it. But the other piece of that is going around the room and you're shaking hands. And you're just saying, hey, how are you? And we see in research, the importance in the workplace of demonstrating that care, or even, as we say in the military, that false motivation turns to real motivation. Even if you're doing it superficially over time, reiterating that really has an impact. And I look at even, among my team at the university, how often people just ask how I'm doing. It happened one time this week and it caught me off guard, and I was so appreciative that somebody did that, because so many people, especially after COVID, have kind of gotten into these silos where we are social creatures and we do need these types of communities and have that purpose in order to have that drive. And I look at that transition going from active duty in the military to getting out, and it's these types of rituals that have helped harness the communities that I have found within jiu-jitsu.
When you switched countries, or when you travel to a different country, one of the things that is interesting to me is how are you doing means something completely different. In the US, how are you doing is just hello. And the expectation is just good. And how are you doing? Good. It's just another way of saying hello. But there are, in Germany, where I live now, that's not the case. How are you doing is a question that requires an answer. And I think that often English speakers, regardless of where they come from, forget that the words often have different meanings and expectations behind them. So I think that's a really fun observation, that somebody says, how are you doing? You're not sure often what they're asking for unless you know them or you know their culture.
Absolutely. That's a really cool point. Have you caught yourself as well at times where you'll ask somebody, how are you doing? And then you actually ask it again to really reaffirm that you mean it
I do
genuinely?
That all the time, actually. And in fact, because I've been a manager for so many years, sometimes when I say to somebody, how are you doing? They're like, good. And then you just jump into project work. And I'm like, hold on. I asked you how you're doing. I want to know the answer to that. And then we can talk about the project work. Or I might say, maybe I should reword that. Maybe I should ask how you're feeling. Because as a recovering American, I no longer lean into the how are you doing as a greeting. It's more of it's the initiation of a conversation for me.
Absolutely. Now I'm reflecting on times too in different cultures. I do miss the UAE, my time there, and where you had to have your coffee or your tea in the morning and really have this small talk, which really isn't that small for some people. It's really, important to have that. And then after, you can really start the workday. But if you don't have that, you're not going to get anything accomplished.
Yeah. Okay, I want to go back to your 5 C's. Specifically, I want to ask why care is at the top. Like, why is care the black belt thing when it almost feels like, yes, consent is important, and I understand why that's lower to the bottom, but care sort of breeds all of those other things. So, why is that at the top?
Which is a question I get a lot. So when you look at the ethics of care from that academic standpoint, it's really coming from a feminist perspective, and really a lot of research is on the caregiver, caretaker, this dynamic in oftentimes as well like nonviolent settings. One of the things, and this was, I used grounded theory in my work. And so I didn't want to fit what the interviewees were saying into a framework I created. I induced it after analyzing that data. And what I found was that people went on this journey. And in Alliance, it wasn't as soon as they stepped in that they felt like they were cared for. It's like, no, you enter in, and then when you show this respect, there's that mutual respect that is earned, then everything kind of starts building from there. And when you're really showing in a meritocratic way, like what you're doing, how you're contributing. And what I started to think about after seeing that is, and this is why, yeah, I like 5 C's because it's a bit of that American marketing style, as I've been told, like a bit alliteration with the letter. But why should you care about somebody? Like if you walk into a room, why should you care about people in that room if you've never really met them before? And so I think while it is idealistic or aspirational to say, oh, care should be at the bottom, it's, or like very normative that care should be at the bottom because we should all care about each other. The reality is not everybody does care about each other. There has to be some type of connection. And, you know, with that white belt piece as well, in the framework, it's actually borderless. And I put it on a white background because when I'm thinking about, yes. And so, you know, we are all humans. And so there is that dignity that we all have as human beings. But then it's like that connection and that respect within that connection, that respect being earned based off of dignity, helps lead into this daily reinforcement of these rituals that allow for shared vulnerability, which helps build that credibility amongst the leadership, which then allows them to really be able to care about people in the organization. And I think, you know, using the Alliance example, that's where you see initiatives like the Alliance Institute, which is a really cool social project for their athletes, and they have locations in Rio, Sao Paulo, and Porto Alegre, and then Alliance Diamonds as well, which is really focused on empowering the women, both women who are professors and athletes, but also women who are students within Alliance as well.
The way you phrased it initially made it sound a little bit transactional, but I think if I understood it correctly, it's only transactional in the sense of time involved. And the transaction is the time you give. And the meritocracy underlying that is your willingness to be a participant in that culture over a period of time, therefore making it less transactional and more, I guess, community focused. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. More community focused. I mean, when you look at, once again, translating it from the Jiu-Jitsu and Alliance context to another organization. And, you know, this is something I look forward to conducting future research and applying it and using this framework with specific companies, which I found out today. I will be doing that later this year. I can't really say much more other than that right now, but for a person to enter an organization, there are certain things that they're consenting to, which is based off of this connection they have through the identity of being an employee in that workplace. And so through this consent and these daily rituals that do have some tension within it, similar to like rolling, it's there's definitely tension and some violence there. You're able to build that connection and enhance that connection within the team. And through that, having that shared vulnerability, or go ahead.
No, I just, there's something that like is kind of nagging at me in that it almost feels like jujitsu and even the military in some ways are cheating, in the sense of like the situations created in those organizations create much more vulnerability by nature. So, you're getting your ego attacked in jiu-jitsu. Like, are you really that good? You're a human fighting another human. In the military, you're broken down and you're put through very difficult things, whether that's the obstacle course or the, CS gas chambers, or like all of the things that breed unity through those difficult situations, which simply do not exist in the corporate world. And so the forced breakdown in order to build blocks don't have that same existence. So it sort of feels like there's a missing gap there.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I did get asked at the beginning when I switched to jiu-jitsu if I was writing this dissertation just to get everybody to train jiu-jitsu as a way of community building. I was like, that's not a bad idea. But it's also something that came up interestingly last night at this event where they were talking about love, and there were a lot of parallels to the military that I thought of during that. And one of the things is what you said. We are thrown into these VUCA environments in the military and then in jiu-jitsu that you really don't encounter in a lot of businesses. Now, thankfully, in a lot of businesses, you don't have the risk. But yes, you are missing a key thing, which is pressure. And so, yes, you have pressure in very different ways, deadlines or reports that you might have to get in, projects that you need to accomplish. But there is a way of fostering and creating that pressure. And oftentimes, going back to this idea of this shared vulnerability, what we see with that pressure is having this authentic contact in a way that allows people to enter into a conversation similar to that slap and fist bump that you have when we're sparring or rolling, and say, hey, this is what we need to discuss. We're just going to discuss this for 15 minutes, like closed door, open, throw all your thoughts out there. And then after, we're going to move on.
Yeah, psychological safety with like setting that up, setting the boundaries, setting the table, setting the environment, creating the culture of psychological safety. Yeah, I got
absolutely having that trust, and but it's really hard to do for a lot of organizations, and so it's saying, going back to that slap and fist bump, hey, this is the only time like we're going to have that. Outside of that, regardless of the organizational structure, like, we're going to maintain respect within that, but outside, like what has occurred, similar to Chatham House rules, it's like what's occurred in this meeting, we aren't necessarily going to share specifics outside. And so that's why I really like having reverse mentorship programs in organizations, especially pairing the mentors, who are usually junior employees, cross-siloed with senior employees, rather than having it be someone who's in their supervisor chain, because then you're able to say, hey, this is a mentor session. We're going to have this authentic, this real conversation. And then once we leave that, we go back to the work roles, still have, this air of respect, but that power distance might go back to the way it was compared to that one-on-one conversation.
This is an interesting framework you're proposing. So I have like military experience, I have jiu-jitsu experience, and I've been in the corporate world for the better part of 25 years, Jesus. And the thing that jumps out at me is I approach all of those things, or I have approached all of those things in incredibly different ways, because I think pressure breaks people in a way in the military that is useful, And I don't think that same pressure is valuable in jiu-jitsu if you're a hobbyist, but I do see where it's valuable if you're a competitor. And I do not apply any of those pressure mechanics when I'm coaching or mentoring people in the corporate world. And I find that pressure is often a thing that is less helpful in the corporate world than it is in other contexts. And finding the way to engage with people and create those relationships, consent-based relationships, for me, it's often more about authenticity than pressure. Because I think when I have historically applied pressure coming from the military, thinking, well, it worked there, that's failed me miserably.
I'm going to turn, here. Just want to show you if you can see that.
Yeah, pressure and authenticity.
Yeah. So when I think about what you're saying about authenticity, I think of authentic servant leadership.
That's exactly what I mean when I say it, yes.
Exactly. And when I also think of pressure, I think of the different types of pressure. We see companies respond because of external pressure, which, is where we had, after George Floyd, this rush to DEI and anti-racism, social justice causes. And now that pressure is no longer there, or it's like a different type of pressure, a complete reversal for a lot of organizations. So there's that external pressure. There's the internal pressure. When I think about what you're saying about authenticity and pressure, I don't necessarily see them as mutually exclusive. And I think the pressure, when I talk about that slap and fist bump, like with the reverse mentorship programs, that pressure is done in a way that maintains that respect and doesn't necessarily embarrass or belittle people. Like you said, the pressure that we deal with in academic life or the corporate world, very different than what we experience in the military. But having that pressure when people are authentic allows for conversations that need to be had. So that's where I come from with like the reverse mentorship program. We've created it in a way that is very intersectional, but the handbooks
Can you just define how you mean intersectional there?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So coming from Kimberly Crenshaw's 1989 definition, when we talk about the identities of someone, that gives them different advantages or disadvantages in environments. It's not universal at all. It's really culturally relativist, but it's like, passport, gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, physical ability, education, social class, these types of things coming together to interact or intersect, I should say, in different ways. And so I most of the time take an intersectional approach because that also helps you really craft strategies or initiatives for individuals rather than creating general actions which might not actually be the best serving for marginalized people in the workplace. Or go ahead.
No. I want to hear the conclusion.
Yeah. So going back to these types of conversations had like within the reverse mentorship, having that pressure is oftentimes someone, that junior employee, being from a marginalized group, talking about their experiences with a senior leader. So there has to be authenticity there. There has to be trust. There has to be transparency. There has to be psychological safety, as you mentioned. The organization needs to have a good psychological contract in place between employer and employee for this to happen. But there's going to be pressure there because you've now made these senior leaders aware. So if they choose not to act, they're no longer ignorant, or they can't claim ignorance, they're negligent. And so that's, when we look at that type of pressure, that's what I mean, really, not necessarily that external or customer pressure or the internal from other stakeholders.
I get where you're coming from. I think the interesting thing for me is a lot of what you're talking about happens very specifically in larger companies, because in smaller companies, the cross-departmental thing, like finding the right kind of intersectional relationships, like that's a lot harder to manufacture is probably not the right word, but just to like map, so to speak. But when I think about pressure, I think about the expectation on the senior leaders of if you don't develop somebody, they will develop themselves and go elsewhere, right? Or they will develop elsewhere, one of those two things. When I think about pressure through authenticity, I think about it from the perspective of I want these people to be the best version of themselves that they can be. And there is only so much pressure that I can put on them to do better. There has to be a mix of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. If I'm the extrinsic motivation, they need to provide some of their own intrinsic motivation. The interesting part for me has always been how do I help them find that in a way that is good for the organization and good for the individual. That's the pressure that I put on myself as the leader or the departmental leader or the individual mentor. And it's like I want to find that meeting place, and I put pressure on myself to find that intersection, and then I put pressure on the other individual in a very light touch kind of way, because if they're not going to do it, then I need to go put my energy into somebody who will, or I have not found the thing that motivates them, and then I need to find that thing or move on. Like that's my issue sort of with the definition of the way you're using pressure is it almost doesn't take into account the mentor's responsibility, unless I'm misunderstanding you.
So which is interesting when you talk about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And if I understand you correctly, it's more you looking at it from that top-down perspective regarding the pressure.
Yeah, I've been a manager and a leader for many years, and so it's hard for me to think about it from a lower perspective than a higher perspective, because I haven't been in that lower situation for a long time.
Mm-hmm. So that's where there's the difference with what I'm talking about regarding reverse mentorship, where the pressure is on the mentee because the mentee is the senior leader. And so the mentor, and usually we look at it through employee resource groups, and that's why we can focus on one dimension of diversity or approach it intersectionally. But really, it's the mentors are giving up not just their time, but usually a lot of energy, because it can be emotionally exhaustive. You know, when we're talking about stories of discrimination or harassment in the workplace. And so that's where, when I also write these handbooks, I write much more. So I create handbooks for both the mentors and the mentees, but write much more to empower the mentors to facilitate the conversations and to help them, because they shouldn't necessarily be subject matter experts on certain dimensions. You know, just because you have a black person or a woman or somebody from the LGBTQ plus community in the workplace, that doesn't mean they're experts on that identity. And so, you know, having certain definitions or concepts that they can look up or reference, and then a bit for the mentees as well, but really having it done in a way where the mentors are having and leading and driving those discussions. And then with that new knowledge, those senior leaders really need to implement action. And usually when we look at traditional mentorship versus reverse mentorship, the reverse mentorship programs are really from the top organizationally in an aim to shift that organizational culture to make things more inclusive. Or even if it's not just about the internal culture, you know, how can they make their branding more inclusive or their communications more inclusive, these types of factors. And so that's where I think it does differ a bit when I hear what you're saying about that type of pressure.
Is that the most common sort of blind spot you see? Is that reverse mentorship fills the gap in knowledge for a lack of inclusivity? or is the reverse mentorship like sort of attacking something else rather than not inclusivity?
So it's interesting because when you look at the origin of reverse mentorship, it came about during the dot-com era with GE, and basically getting their junior employees to help senior employees better understand the new technology that was coming out. And so you could say, well, the inception was great for knowledge sharing, but also inclusion and overcoming ageism. As it's really kind of expanded and different companies have implemented it in different ways, it's gotten to the point where it's filling a blind spot for the senior leaders, but it's also not really isolated on its own. It's helping fill that gap that kind of completes the circle when it comes to not just knowledge sharing, but leadership development as well. Because what you'll often see is that these senior leaders get to know these junior employees and then are willing to be mentors for the employees or allies or sponsors, which is great because we have a lot of awesome mentorship programs, but we also see in research that if mentors don't really understand where their mentees are coming from that intersectional perspective, that they can often impart knowledge in a way that can be detrimental to those mentees. And so that's kind of where that gap and blind spot are filled with reverse mentorship.
Makes sense. Context is the gap more than inclusivity. How do you said you create handbooks. How do you avoid the performative compliance? I guess I don't have a better way of phrasing it, but do you know what I mean when I say performative compliance?
Yeah. Yes. And we see that, well, we don't see that as much now in DEI, but we see that in business and human rights a lot with human rights due diligence, where everybody like checks like, hey, we're fair trade or we don't have child labor, but but then when you really start looking at things, it's a bit gray. When we look at maintaining accountability, the key is really follow-ups and having what I call a TAP, a tangible action plan. So building off of, let's say, we start a program and we assume the mentees don't really know anything. It hits that first pillar. And I just, as a mnemonic device, think of like 4 eyes. Like, it's becoming informed on the issue. It's gaining insight, like a deeper insight into things by really actively listening. So this becoming informed is really looking at systemic and institutional issues in the history of the country or region. And then becoming or gaining that insight is really listening to the mentor more and having those discussions. And then that's also, having that first level is also getting to know each other. So we don't just, we don't walk in immediately and start talking about, the issues of discrimination. It's, hey, we need to actually get to know each other, build that trust within this pair in order to start digging deeper. And so going from that gaining insight, having those more vulnerable discussions allow us to start looking at ways to mitigate issues. And then from there, having that, like I was saying before, leadership development or potential mentor, sponsor, ally in creating inspiration. So having all of this be a learning journey with that tangible action plan, like what is that mentee going to do now, helps mitigate the performativity. I can't, ensure that every company isn't just checking the box, but what I can often do and what I usually integrate is having a follow-up. So once the program's done, a month to 3 months after, just saying, okay, what is your organization really
doing? How long is that program usually?
6 months to a year.
Interesting. So you do is that follow-up more retrospective-y, or is that follow-up more focused on an extension of the program?
It can be either or. It really depends on where the company's at and how satisfied they are with the outcomes.
Do you feel like some of the stuff that you've learned through doing this and also learned through talking to Alliance would apply to some of the other jiu-jitsu infrastructures, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to bring it back to jiu-jitsu. I would say that when you look at the Alliance methodology and culture, that it could definitely be applied to other schools in a way to benefit them. I know, I conducted an interview at Alliance in Italy, since that was the closest to where I'm at in Switzerland. The culture remains the same, the mentality, the teaching approach. But what I notice in Brazil is that you really, and it's not a bad thing, it's just different because of how Alliance was founded and the fact that Fabio Gurgel really has the headquarters in Sao Paulo. You really see a uniformity amongst the way that the academies in Brazil and in Sao Paulo specifically have grown and developed. And when I see what they've done in Brazil in comparison to other academies, I mean, you've got, I think, Gracie Barra, which is really like much more of a strict franchise model, compared to Alliance, which is kind of in the middle, where you've got like the affiliation, but you're able to gain access to the methodology, to courses. Fabio is brought in external teachers talking about finance and marketing, really giving his gym owners and teachers this knowledge to help broaden their perspective, rather than just saying, oh, you've opened an Alliance, you got the logo, you've got to sell our kimonos, but I'm not going to teach you how to run your gym, balance the books, or think about P&L. And so I think having a structure like that, especially when you look at what's going on in jiu-jitsu right now, would help kind of bring it back to having those objective standards on what we see as culture. And Alliance on their website and within the gym has their values listed as well. And that really stuck out in my mind, because I was like, well, I can't just repeat their values, even though I do talk about that, especially in my methodology. But I would really appreciate that, like going to other schools and seeing on the wall when I walk in, not just 30 rules that they just printed off of Google and seeing like what jiu-jitsu rules are, but hey, like this is our standard. Here are the policies. These are the things. Going back to like what I said about Aranya in Barcelona, I thought that was great. Here's the way classes are conducted during training. Keep this in mind. Here are rules for positional sparring or rolling. And I think that would also help jiu-jitsu grow in a much healthier way, rather than having anybody who really wants to just open up a school.
Yeah, by the way, I wasn't trying to bring it back to jiu-jitsu. I was trying to bring it back to your PhD thesis, but either way, it kind of worked because they're both,
no, that's fine.
They're both tightly coupled.
Yeah.
I want to say one thing and then ask a question. One of the best sort of shortest rule sets I've ever looked at is Giles Garcia runs a gym in Scotland, Ronin Grappling. There's like 5 rules, and they basically say, this is it. Like, you violate this, you're off the mat, you're out of the gym. And they have used that a few times. And I don't want to pretend to know them off the top of my head, but I remember reading them and thinking more gyms need to operate like that. Which sort of brings me to the question aligned with what you were talking about, is what do you think about associations now that you've spent some time studying them? Do you think associations still have a place in jiu-jitsu, especially from this academic perspective that you looked at them from?
So that's an interesting question. And one of the things that I've reflected on, and I mentioned to kind of be thorough in my dissertation, is like why Alliance in comparison to Gracie Barra or Renzo's or Nova Union or some of the other teams. And Kendall Rusing's mom actually did her dissertation on Gracie Barra, but interviewed Jacare for that. And then when you look at Renzo's, which I love my Renzo family, I've made some amazing friends just through the Henzo network, but it's also kind of fragmented in a way where it allows for people to really have their individual cultures and styles within Henzo, which in a way allows for innovation. I mean, look at, who arguably is the greatest no-gi grappler of all time, coming from the blue basement under Danaher. And what Gordon has been able to do specifically within Jiu-Jitsu, talking just about his Jiu-Jitsu. And then like Nova Union, there's a few Nova Union affiliations here in Switzerland, but there's not really this community that I see amongst them, even though they have people coming from Brazil and they're able to have that knowledge exchange. What I see then, so going, let's say, that type of affiliation system is kind of on the far end, like I said, with Gracie Baja being really that strict franchise model and with some really restrictive contracts, from what I've heard, with the association. I think the association allows for kind of the best of both worlds, where you're able to, you have your left and your right limits, but within that, you're able to have some freedom on how you want to run things. And I think we've seen that in different ways in Sao Paulo specifically, where there's one school where Casquinha is, and I can't remember, I think it's Alliance Mocha. And, he is very much within the Alliance system, but he adapted his schedule and his facilities to really focus on kids, and that has taken off. He's doing really well with that. And so other people are able to say, oh, we're in the association. We really want to hear, when we have these summits and these meetups, we want to hear from him. And how does he really do things so we can replicate that? And so I think that really allows for a more cohesive growth and model sharing, or knowledge sharing model than the affiliation systems where, you're going to keep in touch with people, but really it's kind of you doing your thing and just flying the flag for a banner.
Bringing somebody in to put stripes and belts on people just to validate your opinion. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Oh, before we continue, going back to rules though, I wanted to say, when you were talking, there was something really cool at Fenris that I noticed. I mean, it's kind of gross, but kind of cool in a safety and gym rule way, which was in the locker room, the picture
That's because
that had, the staff and...
I very specifically pushed for that to be put up. And I think that is so important because, just really quickly, so everyone who's listening knows, there is a picture that is unpleasant to look at of 3 or 4 different kinds of skin infections, and it's on the walls in the locker room of the men's and women's locker room. And that was because we have a giant mat, we can fit 100 people on it at an open mat. And people didn't know what these things look like. And very few people are going to spend their time and go look at what skin infections look like. They might just be like, oh, my skin's looking red. But if they see that when they change, that will stick with them and will remind them like, oh, if it looks like this, stay off the mat. And it's much less subjective and much more informational. And my personal opinion is I would rather have that mildly unpleasant thing to look at in the locker room and have people be informed about what it is than being unsure about, well, you know what, maybe I'll just like wear a long sleeve when I normally wouldn't and not tell anybody. And then the whole gym gets, skin infections. Yeah, that to me is so important.
Well, I still am incredulous. It's 2026, and yet we still have people who are running barefoot to use the bathroom and then coming back to the mat. It's like small things like that.
If every time I see that, I immediately pull the person off the mat and I'm like, get off the mat, go clean your feet. Don't do that again. Like people walk in and they're like, well, we were supposed to change into flip-flops at the door and I forgot my flip-flops, so I'm just going to walk barefoot. And then you're not coming on the mat. I like to be pretty chill about a lot of stuff, but you have the potential to really mess up a lot of people's day or week or whatever. Like, that's not okay, you know? And so I try to be pretty strict about that. But I haven't seen that at too many other gyms. And I think more gyms should be showing what skin infections look like, because the average person is not going to go do that investigation or learning on their own.
No, definitely not. You know, talking about gym culture, one thing that just kind of popped into my head too, like with the flip-flop policy, is also uniform policy. And that kind of goes back to your question on like Alliance being an association and how they have this uniform policy where you need to wear the Alliance gi. And I remember, I still have, it's in New Jersey in a box. It's like an A2, but I don't think it would fit me anymore. Like the very first Alliance gi when they had the changeover in policy. And I've heard different things over the years about whether people should have to wear like the school uniform, or maybe, you know, you have to wear a school patch. Like it could be any gi as long as there's a school patch, or, you know, everybody has to wear a white gi. And what I found in my research is that ritual of wearing the same uniform, similar to being in the military, like it created that shared identity, which helped break down the biases that people had, you know, when they're coming in off the street. And yeah, you might see when they first walk in somebody who's wearing a business suit versus somebody who's just in, you know, some shorts and a ragged t-shirt. But then once they all and I did ask a few people like about their thoughts on different brands of Alliance skis, but you know, once they all put on that gi, it says Alliance. And so there's a school in Zurich that has only like, I think 2 or 3 schools, but even when it was just one, they always had like this uniform policy. I don't agree with that. Like if you're just like this upstart school, the uniform policy doesn't make sense. How are you going to grow if you expect everybody to have to wear your thing? But I think when you have an organization as large as the Alliance Association, that it does help when you have that type of policy. And you know, it's as long as it's Alliance gi, it doesn't matter the color and stuff.
I had a conversation a couple episodes ago with Steve Jolly. He runs Rio Bravo Project, which is, you know, a charity, and he brings people onto the mat. And his rule is everybody wears the same gi, because in his case, a lot of the kids, and they're all kids, don't have anything. And so this puts everybody on equal footing. And that to me makes total sense. I also appreciate the wanting everybody on equal footing, like the Gracie Barra model. It's a white gi or a blue gi, or it's not, right? Like I certainly understand that, but that's not also a culture that I'm a part of or interested in being a part of. I don't judge the Gracie Barra. I mean, I judge them a little bit because I'm not a fan of that, but like they've clearly got a wonderful program, and they built a community, and they built many communities, and they have wonderful people running them in many cases. But my personal opinion is that if you're on the mat, as long as you're wearing a reasonable gi, and I get there's some room in reasonable, that's fine. We're all wearing the same type of pajamas. We're all wearing the same type of things, like safety clothing. Like for me, that's the culture I want. But if somebody says, you know what, white gi, blue gi, and that's it, those are your only choices, fine. You know, that's the delta in cultures that I think needs to exist, even if I don't necessarily agree with it.
It's funny because when you look at things from a no-gi perspective and people try and uphold the same policy, it always gets mixed up with belt ranks. Like you always, I don't think I've ever been to a school that's had that policy where they've been able to maintain consistency with like all black belts have to wear the black rash guard, or all blue belts, because then they run out of certain colors or sizes. And so one day you're going to have a black belt who might wear a blue belt rash guard.
Or some people just don't have the finances, you know?
Yeah.
And they can't buy a new set of gear every couple of years because that's not their financial situation. And I don't think jiu-jitsu should be in the business of punishing people for their financial situations, you know, especially not in the capitalist world that we live in.
Absolutely. I do like gyms that if you do have to wear their gi, like where they'll give you, you know, a discount, or maybe they'll have a special, like if you sign up, you'll get a free gi.
Yeah.
Or like free rash guard
I can
set,
support
just
that
to
too.
kind of get that started.
One of the other things that I want to talk about is that you work with sportigration, right? That's still a thing that you do. Can you just talk about really briefly what it is and how you got involved? Because I think this ties in with the community, with the associations. Like there's a thread here that I've sort of been pulling on this whole conversation.
Yeah, totally. So Sportigration is an organization I really appreciate. I actually found out about them because I was looking, when we talk about community, and there was a time before I went on this mental health journey, like for getting diagnosed with PTSD from the military and all that, where I was just like feeling super down. And I was like, one, I don't have a community, and two, I should be giving back more. Like I've done a lot, especially with jiu-jitsu. Like I've got skills and knowledge that I can use to help other people. And so when I was looking, the University of Zurich had on their website like something about sporticration, and then I was looking at the Canton and City of Zurich websites as well, and it was like sportigration. I was like, oh, sportigration. So then I contacted them and I was like, hey, I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. Would you be interested in setting up a program? So we had a talk, and that was, I think, that was 2023 when it started. And it was really cool because sportigration, the reason it's called sportigration, is using sports to help with integration. And so people with refugee status are able to train or do certain sports and activities. They have a bunch on the website with people from the community who are either citizens or residents. And so if you're a person with the refugee status, you have to pay like 10 francs, and then you all train together. And so it helps create that connection where people get that authentic contact and, talk with each other and sometimes help each other with jobs or different things. So it's a really cool way to foster that community. Now, because of the place we were training, when it got cold, we had to look for a new school, and then that's when I was getting ready to go conduct my research in Brazil. So I stepped back from doing the direct teaching, and then we were able to get the program set up within one of the schools in Zurich, and now that's been going, and two of the guys who are part of the sportigration program have now gotten their blue belts, and that's cool to see. And what I've done is basically just been a connector and saying, hey, what about this school? Or in Bern, now I do like Fusion Sports Academy in Bern, but it's in Bern, so it's a bit far away. They've got the largest mat space, really nice gym set up, and their instructors really have kind of that martial arts culture and background and approach from judo as well. And so, with my role with sportigration, I'm like, hey, do you guys want to talk with them? And then I asked the gym, like, if they'd be open to set up, and then just creating that connection to spread jiu-jitsu through sportigration in different academies.
What have you kind of learned or applied your learning from all of this association research that you did for your PhD to kind of setting up what is effectively a small association of focused integration support?
So I think the biggest thing is just values. What is the gym culture, and what values does that gym owner or that gym leader have? Because that's going to be really important in maintaining that cohesion within sportigration or for those participants within sportigration. Because we could say, okay, this gym here, all over Switzerland has the ability for sportigration participants to join, but are they really getting not necessarily the same style of jiu-jitsu, but are they getting the healthy environment and culture that are going to allow them to feel like they belong and grow and create connections with other people?
So you're doing that like assessment by talking to the gym owners, or are you like showing up and seeing the vibe on the mat? Like, what's your assessment criteria here?
So at first I was showing up on the mat, and now it's really getting that feedback. So we talk, with the sports aggregation staff, because they've got the volunteers and then they've got full-time staff, and so they're the ones who are having the most contact with the participants.
Yeah.
So I'm getting that feedback from them.
Okay, cool. That's interesting. I think it's fascinating how much of your general like focus is on community, whether it's through the integration, whether it's through your PhD, or just really what you're looking for in jiu-jitsu gyms. That's like the thread that I've been noticing throughout the course of this conversation.
That's cool. I think it comes from my upbringing. My dad was he's no longer, he retired from coaching, but he was a college football coach, and my mom was a teacher. And then I calculated it. Between the ages of 0 and 18, I moved on average every year and a half on the East Coast. And so it was like, you find your place, then you have to uproot and move again. And, I'm living in places like Morgantown, West Virginia, or Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Dover, Delaware, Athens, Georgia. And so even though it's the East Coast, like very different cultures.
Very different cultures.
So it was always the situation where I had to kind of find my niche. And growing up, I grew up in the church, and it was usually that and football. And then when I was in high school is when I started jiu-jitsu. And I was really ostracized at first because my dad was a college football coach. Like, he expected me to go on to college, play football. My brother did, my uncles did. So he wasn't necessarily happy. He's cool with it now. I took him to jiu-jitsu a couple times. He couldn't handle it. So he's like cool with it now. But the other thing was like leaving the football team and like kind of branching out, because I went to this college preparatory school. At the time, they didn't even have a wrestling team. And so for me to leave this football team, this community that I was so entrenched in, and kind of go out on my own, was seen as like this rebellion. And so from there, I really started to like grasp onto jiu-jitsu. I remember, and Alec brought it up a few weeks ago when we were talking, because in Athens was where Forrest Griffin was training. And, before, during, and after, I should say, The Ultimate Fighter. And so Athens was really seen kind of as this up-and-coming place, still like a quality place for training, but I was training with a guy named Casey Baines, who's got a school, Megalodon MMA. Casey and his family are great people, but at the time we were training in his attic, and he had mats there. There's this guy named Noe Hernandez who fought Chuck Liddell at UFC 17. Chuck Liddell's first fight. And Noe, like, it's just, right now I'm walking around at like 96 kilos. Like, I've put on a decent amount of muscle these days, but Noe was like 230, 240, but still like, I think around my height. It just like this like Wolverine. And he had gone to Michigan and trained with Rashad Evans as well. So Noe gets me and puts me in side mount 100 kilos. Like, using that shoulder pressure, I can't do anything. I just remember getting home and my mom saw like my nose was completely purple. And she's like, Christian Pierce, if that ever happens again, I will never let you train this art. And so when she said that, like, it was more motivation for me to just keep training and like get really good. And after high school, I went to the United States Military Academy at West Point. And while there were people who had been training jiu-jitsu and doing MMA was still like taboo then. Like, I got told once I was supposed to fight Al Iaquinta.
Al's tough, man.
And, well, it was hilarious because Al had this post on Facebook, and he's like, I'm fighting some West Coast dude named Christian Pierce. I was like, it's West Point, not West Coast. I'm from the East Coast. It's West Point. But when I went into the office, like, to tell the head of combatives at the time about this fight, he goes, Christian, go ahead, take the fight. But when you come back on Monday, you'll no longer be a cadet. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, like you aren't allowed to do that. Like, if you do that, that'll be like a violation of our rules. I was like, okay. So then I created this whole process where I was like, all right, you know what? I'm going to create my own community here, like, and really formalize it. Because I still keep in touch with some of the guys from our team who are off doing great things. But, you know, really to formalize it in a way that would be a platform for cadets to be able to go and compete. And so that led to briefings with colonels and generals. And eventually we were able to get this official West Point mixed martial arts team started. Irony of it was called the MMA team, but we still weren't allowed to fight MMA, even though they make everybody do boxing, which I'm like, you get more concussions in boxing than you do just outright MMA. But
I very much agree with you.
So we were only allowed to do jiu-jitsu, but there, you know, I was the captain of the team and I had my community, but I was really frustrated that we couldn't do MMA. And so the judo coach then recruited me, and he's like, hey, you know, I think you've got a lot of potential. You should help me teach combatives. So that was cool as a cadet, teaching combatives to officers, until I realized that the officers still saw me as a cadet. And so after beating them, they were a bit mad. But, you know, I was able to then join the judo team. And, you know, because of the judo competition rules and we won the national championship, I was able to get my black belt in Hoteikan Jiutjitsu and judo in a year, which was really cool. Like, I was still white belt in jiu-jitsu, which was hilarious. But, you know, so having that community and really kind of finding jiu-jitsu and martial arts in general is my thing. Like, I boxed, was on the karate team at West Point as well. Didn't like it because of the katas and the style of sparring.
The katas are hard. I did karate for many years as well. I really struggled. The katas felt, I see the value of them now, but at the time I was like, this is not enough. I don't like doing this. I want more. And it never scratched that itch.
It's funny you say that because I appreciate katas now too. I'm like, as I get older, I wouldn't mind going back to karate and just like doing some katas sometime.
I think I ended with a brown belt in karate. I never ended up getting the black belt. Jiu-jitsu is the only thing I ever got a black belt in. But I think it's so funny to look at the anger that these kinds of things bring up for people. They're like comparatively like, well, your karate black belt's just katas. And it's like, well, for some people, but you know, you look at Shotokan or like there's some real like Kyokushin, like there's some real tough black belts in there that rival some of the stuff that we do in jiu-jitsu in sort of intensity and duration. So yeah. Absolutely.
Have you ever seen the documentary, The Strongest Karate? There's two versions of it, or at least there were. One that's free on YouTube and then one on Amazon Prime. Man, that is, you want to see like some old school martial arts, check that out.
Yeah, well, I'll make note of that and watch it. There's one topic that I want to talk about that we didn't really get into earlier, which is the transition from the military and the mental health challenges, because I think that's something that you and I both share is the transition. Like, how has that manifested itself in your martial arts life? And how have you used martial arts, assuming you have, because I have, have you used martial arts to deal with some of those mental health challenges?
So I think what's important is to talk about the transition out of the military. And it's something, you know, when you're in it, you don't really think about. But now that I look back, now that I've been off active duty for a decade, I was really, really a dumb kid sometimes. And
I feel the same way my transition too off of active duty.
So I'm glad I'm not alone in that field. But I had voluntarily extended out my second deployment because we were short-staffed with the operations we were conducting. So I was in the Middle East for 18 months for my second deployment. Then I got back September 11th. So like, cannot ever forget that, like getting back to the States from my deployment on September 11th. Then I go on terminal leave.
2001 you got back?
Oh, no, I'm not that old.
Okay,
September
that's why I was
11th,
like,
2015. Sorry,
okay.
no, just the fact it was September 11th. But thanks for asking and
I was
clarifying.
like, I don't know how that math works, but okay, thank you.
That math is not mathing.
Yeah.
I'm a Highlander. So, I get back, and I had already put in packet. And so my terminal leave was November. So I basically, I was getting back. I didn't really take vacation when I got back. I think I was at Bragg my whole time, and so I think I got back and went down to visit my family in Georgia, and then went back and started doing all the tap and everything to transition. So I moved to New Jersey in November. That was when I popped into Henzo's for the first time after being back, and then started working at a mid-sized accounting firm in January 2016. So we're looking from September, not even really September, you could say November, even though I was just doing the terminal leave stuff and ETSing, but November to January, less than 2 months, because I think it was November 23rd for terminal leave, and then January 11th is when I started the job. So less than 2 months to jump into a corporate role. And I was their first veteran since they had Vietnam veterans. So I was the post 9/11 veteran, and I was in the reserves at the time, and my unit was always doing 3-day trainings, and so my boss couldn't understand why I needed to take Friday off to go to reserve training. And so I found community through Henzo's, and this was before We Defy got involved there too. And I bring them up just because this weekend they have the We Defy Invades RGA, but Henzo's and then my reserve unit, and talking to a lot of the officers there. But then once I was politely fired from my role, I was told basically that they were too small for me and I have greater ambitions and I should go to grad school. Henzo's was there as my foundation because of the manager at the time, Max McGar. He's the owner and runs Henzo Gracie Reno in Nevada now, and he allowed me to volunteer as a just back end office worker and doing a lot of the stuff for them. And that was a cool experience, one, to see kind of how an academy runs, but also just to even get to know everybody even more. And I was also, it helped that I was training 3 hours a day, because I do both classes in the evening, and just sitting on the mat. I miss those times where you're just on the mat having conversations about anything and just with anybody. One of the people I think that I still kind of get emotional about, who I had just a mat side conversation with a couple times, was Anthony Bourdain. And you see someone like that, and he's so authentic of a person, and just to have that type of conversation was so meaningful. And so that really kept me grounded. And then I went to Brazil during the Olympics while I was applying to grad school, found out about the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro's business school, Copiage. So these
these conversations that you were having, it sounds like you're underlining your struggle during the transition to find your footing, right? You didn't find it in the accounting firm. You sort of were trying to just feel grounded in the gym just by having these conversations, and you didn't really know what you were going. And just so I'm clear, you're kind of outlining the fact that you felt like that transition was lacking, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is one of the reasons I like getting into the details of it, because even though I was training jiu-jitsu throughout, there was a lot of movement, and it really wasn't, I think, until a year or two ago that I really started to look at things outside of jiu-jitsu regarding my mental health. Because, we hear jiu-jitsu saves lives, so it's like, I just need to train more jiu-jitsu, but that's not always the case. So I was in Rio for 2 years, trained, like I said, when I'm in Rio with Nova Union, which was, and still is a great place to go back to. Really appreciate Dede Pederneiras and everything he's done. And then Carlson Gracie Laranjeris, which is one of probably the most underrated jiu-jitsu schools I've been to in the world. Awesome place. But having those really helped as far as like having that grounding in the community. I really appreciated my friends from grad school as well. But like we talked about kind of earlier, you've got your military community, jiu-jitsu community, and then the corporate world. And there's much more that aligns with the military community and jiu-jitsu than you really see in the business world. And so it's much easier to kind of hang out with the jiu-jitsu crowd, even though I had great friends here and have a lot of good memories. But then it was also going back to the military community that kind of led me on this journey, because there was another West Point in Rio who started a nonprofit helping Afro-descendant and indigenous Brazilians and Colombians get into grad school. So popped over to Colombia to help him out. And then that was when I moved to Sao Paulo, because I wanted to see what Sao Paulo was like. And once again, was really ingrained in the jiu-jitsu community there and kept in touch with veterans. And then in the pivot to doing my PhD and studying in Switzerland, I really struggled because I'm in a country now where there are some West Pointers and some former military here, but it's a very different society in general. So Switzerland, out of all the places I've been to in the world, has definitely been the hardest to integrate from a language standpoint, cultural standpoint as well, and bureaucratic standpoint even. And so, like we were talking about with the jiu-jitsu communities here, I wasn't really able to find that. And that's really where I started to trip up myself, even though I'd done all this stuff, Army officer, West Point, master's, now doing a PhD. In my private life, like I felt like I was like close to the edge. And then in January 2023, my dog died, which I think for like pet owners, it really is losing like a family member, because this was my dog, Domino. He had been my dog at Bragg. Then I gave him to my mom when I left the States, but I raised him, and then after a decade, he had some health problems, and so my mom had to put him in sleep, and that put me in a really dark place. And then
mine was 2024.
Oh man,
I had to put my dog down in 2024. Oh. Yeah, I know the feeling.
Dude, yeah. I'm sorry, because it's rough. So then, not really having a good jiu-jitsu community and ending up kind of in the struggles that I had, I was like, okay, I need to do something. So I tried therapy. Therapy was rough because it's hard finding somebody in Switzerland who can really understand talking about the military experience. Then even, I went to AA, kind of looking for a community there, and like, it was okay, but really just like not for me. And so eventually I was like, hey, I'm going to a psychiatrist. I'm going to really see, like, because I feel like I'm really like at the edge. And this was also during my time researching in Brazil. So when I got back, I got a full assessment done, like brain scans, like putting on the sensors and everything. And so I was diagnosed with autism, ADHD, and complex PTSD. From there, that really helped me, because I was like, okay, I was going crazy, but this is why I was going crazy, because I had tried when I first got out of the military to just do, rather than pausing and saying, hey, what did I really go through? I need to process what I experienced like in the military. What did that really mean, especially as I transition out and I become a civilian? I take off this uniform and I don't have the identity anymore. And so while I've kept in touch with a lot of the military community,
keeping the identity, do you think I want to catch this before you transition off of it. Do you think that shifting your identity from the military to having the identity of explanation was validating or supportive, or did it just shift your ability to know who you are, right? Because you shifted from I'm military to, oh, I'm autistic, I'm ADHD, and I think you said what, complex PTSD was the third one?
Yeah. So, when I go about things on a daily basis, nowadays the veteran identity really sticks with me more than like the neurodivergence, especially because there's so much stigma around it, where like if you say it to somebody, oh, everybody's a little ADHD nowadays, right? Or like we've all got PTSD from something, and it's like potentially, but your PTSD is probably different than mine.
Yeah. Not all of us have been in combat. Like,
yeah,
I have, you have, but that's different kind of PTSD for sure.
Exactly. So, I've kind of gone back to the veteran community in a validating way. And I've also gone back to the veteran community because I'm still trying to get my GI Bill benefits 6 years into my PhD. But really, what getting that diagnosis, like having the PTSD diagnosis specifically, because I that was from a psychiatrist in Switzerland, and then I went through the VA process, which that was rough. I was in tears at the end because they really, which I get it. They want to make sure like you're legit in what you have and not just like trying to check the box.
Process is often feels like victim blaming.
It's
brutal.
Yeah. But what that's kind of allowed me to do is own that identity more, because I realized I had a lot of guilt in getting out of the military, like because of friends who had died, or even when in coordinating missions, and I'm like, real. Yeah, oh totally. Was I complicit in like potentially bombing like innocent people? You start like ruminating on those types of things, and it's like
I've thought about that a lot too.
Even looking at like business and human rights, and like going from the military to that angle, it's like, hey, there were things that we did at the time that might not have been good, but those also developed us into the people we are today. And so, not that I forget about these instances or my friends, but it's being able to help disconnect the emotions more from those experiences in a way that doesn't necessarily impact me.
That's a really good lesson, and that's a very hard one to learn. I'm very fortunate in that I was able to use MDMA shortly after coming back from combat to help me separate the emotions from the situations and sort of work through it. And I could not at the time, this was in 2005, I could not at the time find like a therapist who would work with me. And now there's many out there, and I hope that people get to take advantage of that more. But, I sort of did it myself, and I tried to learn how to separate emotion. I think that created more problems for me down the line in being able to process emotions in a healthy way, because I wasn't guided. I wasn't supported in that way, but that was the way I worked through it, was MDMA. Fortunate that I had that access.
Yeah. Which is really fascinating to see. I think even on the VA website now, like they just say like, oh, if you're interested in like MDMA therapy, like check here.
It was legal and normal in the, I believe, 70s and early 80s, or 60s, 70s and early 80s as marriage counseling, as part of marriage therapy in the United States. I forget exactly what year it was banned and the exact reason. I could guess probably the early 80s from the Reagans and Dare. That would be my guess. But it was so normalized that this was the standard part of marriage counseling, because it helped people open up to their emotions. And when I heard about that, I was like, oh, maybe this will help me. And that was what triggered me to do it. But I don't know that there is a standard therapy right now, and I really hope that it gets standardized in a sufficient way to help people process trauma in a more healthy and rigorous way.
Absolutely. I hope that just more resources in general become available, because we're all individuals. So what works for you might not work for somebody else, or like what works for me might not work for you. And so we really need to tailor these things. And I think that's also where jiu-jitsu does come back in, where there are a couple papers showing the benefits of jiu-jitsu in helping veterans with their PTSD, having that contact therapy. And once again, not that jiu-jitsu is the end-all be-all, but it definitely does provide, when you have a healthy gym, that community and that way to really process these things.
I forget exactly the numbers, but there was something like exercise helps with depression 30% of the time, and depression medication helps only 12%. And it's something along those lines. And that doesn't mean that there's not a necessity. Like sometimes people are severely depressed, they need medication, and that's the only way. But on average, exercise is going to be a better preventative, or a better antidote to some of the depressive situations that many people are in. And I know that was true for me the majority of my life.
Yeah, and that's it. It's interesting that you say that as well, because I've taken medication now for going on a year and a half, and I've seen the difference it can make when I'm on and off of it. But also going back to exercise, even though I don't have my jiu-jitsu community like I would like, I'm working out like 5 to 6 times a week nowadays, which I hadn't allowed myself to do for a while, where I was in the gym, but it was like just like anger lifting. And now it's like focused, sometimes a bit angry, or people think I look angry, but it's really just like getting in and just like getting it out there. And there's a phrase I was reflecting on. I went to the Student Veterans of America National Conference in January, and I was thinking about student warriors and how we're taught in the military that you're going to be fit, you're going to be a fast thinker, you're going to be a team builder, a leader, all these different things. And then it's really hard when people are transitioning out, when you've been told like you have to get up at 5 a.m. every day and you aren't really a morning person, to continue that routine. And I think it's important really to instill that, because like you're saying, I mean, the benefits of exercise are so great. And now I'm like, I'm not going to get up early. I'm not a morning person, but I'm going to make sure I do that. And I think if we could get that mentality more within people, not just being lifelong learners, but really being physically fit lifelong.
Self-discipline is freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It doesn't have to start at 5:45 in the morning, but self-discipline is freedom. That was one of the biggest lessons I took from the military. I was not a morning person in my 20s when I was in the military, but I am now, so I'm very lucky that I switched. You have had a lot of experience, like a huge breadth of experience between the military, between moving around. Like, what piece of advice do you just kind of wish everybody knew?
Damn. Oh man, that was like one of those moments where it's like, I'm being authentic and talking to you, but just like unfiltered, because the first thing I thought of was a story from my first deployment. And I tell this story a lot to people because it was so eye-opening for me. In my first deployment, I was a tactical control officer for a Patriot battery in the UAE. And I mean, it's a disclosed location now. You can see it on Google Maps. But, we're an Army base within a U.S. Air Force base within an Emirati Air Force base. And my soldiers thought, we're really like, we're in war. Which, I mean, nowadays it is more volatile. At the time it wasn't so much. But once a month, if we put in the proper paperwork and it was processed correctly, I could take them to the mall, off base. Obviously plainclothes, unmarked vehicle, but just arcade, go have some KFC, get some candy, like shop a bit. And there was one specific time where a soldier from another platoon came with us, and Next day, we're on site and he knocks on my tent door and he's like, "Sir, can I talk to you?" I was like, yeah, of course. What's up? He's like, "So I just want to thank you." I was like, "Yeah, sure." He's like, no, sir, I want to thank you for yesterday." I was like, "Okay, you're welcome." He's like, "No, sir, you don't understand. Before yesterday, I thought all the people out here were just towel heads. And now I realize they have families just like us." And I mean, the sincerity of that really, like, it made me smile, but I was just like blown away at the same time. Because heading into this region, this soldier had completely dehumanized people and really thought, it was that othering, really thought they were something less. And then just going to the mall and seeing people who probably had like 100 times more money than he had at the time was eye-opening. And so that was something that, in conjunction with my growing up and moving around, really stuck with me. And it's be open to other perspectives and other cultures in a respectful way. Find your place in the world, because there's a place for you. And I think, in our travels as well, like you feel places where you are more comfortable or you are safer than in other places. But find that place. And if it's not in your home country or your home region, really approach things respectfully in a way that allows you to build that community and have that knowledge sharing, because at the end of the day, we're all people who deserve to live a life of dignity, respect, and the reciprocation as such.
Yeah, that's a hard way of phrasing it, but a beautiful, it's a hard way of learning it, but a beautiful way of phrasing it. Just out of curiosity, where do you think that sort of broke down? Like, did you think he didn't get the right training about the region? Do you just think that there weren't enough people talking to him about, hey, we're all humans? Or like, what do you think happened there?
I think it's a problem with ethnocentrism as an American and education. If I recall, he was from West Virginia.
Yeah.
And so, when we have this training, like I laughed when I was a lieutenant because I got sent to the Middle Eastern Cultural Integration course, which was a week long. And that was actually, it was really fascinating. But, having these experiences or, growing up in a very multicultural family allowed me to really see these things. If someone grows up in a very homogenous society, and this was before, I think, Instagram, it started 2011, 2012. I mean, Facebook was around, YouTube was around, but you didn't really have this globalization or internationalization that you have now. And even now, I mean, it's still completely skewed depending on your region and what your interests are in. And so if you're only being fed one thing, there's this cognitive dissonance when you start seeing something different. And you can either fall into a confirmation bias and only look for things that really confirm what you previously thought, or you can have the shocking moment like the soldier and be like, whoa, not only do they have malls here and drive cars, they like eating Burger King and McDonald's, and I mean that's a symptom of late stage American capitalism. Yeah, but exactly. Those types of commonalities.
But one of the things, part of the reason I asked was because when we went into Iraq in 2004, that was a heavy part of the training, and I remember putting together courses for the soldiers, reminding them of hey, we're in their country, they are families. They want to go home to their families. We want to go home to ours. I remember talking about all that. And so I was curious, did that, was there a miss there, or?
It's interesting that we didn't have things as extensive as they should have been. for my first deployment. My second deployment, when I was working with the Air Force, I was there so long, like it felt like the Green Mile, and I was Tom Hanks, that I was teaching the cultural integration courses for incoming personnel. But the thing that I noticed between my first and second deployments, which were completely different, is that the first was much more of a shying away from the culture. It was like I said, I mean, a U.S. Army base within a U.S. Air Force base within an Emirati base. I mean, even going to the Emirati base was sometimes seen as like taboo. Like people thought I was a rebel because I'd take my soldiers over there for lunch and haircuts when we didn't have missions. And I'm like, they've got some great shawarma. So I think our chain of command was very risk averse and not culturally aware. My second deployment, I was able to do a lot because I was mainly working with host nation forces, and they're like, go integrate into the cultures. So I mean, one of the things that I think was really special for me culturally was when I was in Jordan during Ramadan, and fasting and doing the prayers and having suhoor and iftars and like really going through that. Really created an appreciation on both sides, and trust that really ended up saving some lives. Some crazy situations, but it was like those types of things really came from my background in being open and having the lived experiences, where I think even though you might have like the book training, it's really hard, I think, once you get there in person, if you don't have the proper leadership who's really open to saying, hey, here's really what you should know about Islam. It's okay, like, even if you're a Christian, read the Quran. Like, that's not gonna like immediately invalidate your belief in Jesus and God, because actually, Muslims believe in Jesus as well in a different way. And so I think having really that open-minded perspective would have now, when I look back, because you're making me reflect on the first deployment, it would have made such a difference in our ability to really forge relationships and accomplish things.
I think it's important to be curious. I when I was in high school, I took a comparative religions course, and I had to read the Quran. I read the Tao Te Ching. I read, and I grew up Jewish, and I went to church because I was in military school. So I was immediately exposed to pretty much all the big stuff and tried to remain curious. I have an aversion to religion right now. Like I try not to judge people who are religious, and I personally don't feel great about it. But if somebody's religious, I'm like, yeah, look, you do you, just don't proselytize.
Absolutely. Which is, I think, for a lot of people who are really passionate about their religion, it's hard to do. But when you do have...
Like the religion of Jiu-Jitsu, for example, or CrossFit.
Exactly. Jitsu. Well, that's an interesting thing. I wrote a paper a couple years ago, I say a couple, now almost a decade ago, on whether we should approach Jiu-Jitsu as a religion.
I think most people do, whether you want to or not.
Yeah.
Accidentally, but very much so.
Well, I think when you look at what it really means to be a part of a religion and have these shared beliefs, Jiu-Jitsu kind of fits it.
It does. It does fit. Tell me, what are you excited for in the future?
I'm excited to finish my PhD.
How close are you, by the way?
First and
couple
foremost.
Couple more weeks?
Yeah, so in debates with my supervisor, but should be submitting March 16th, and then I think the defense will be about April 23rd or 24th.
So you're right there.
Yeah, right there at the end. Then in May, I go back to Brazil to present at the Global Business and Human Rights Scholars Association. So looking forward to that. And then whatever comes after this. So I'm applying to roles right now. But I think for now, my time in Switzerland will be done. I've been here, in July it will have been 6 years, the longest I've lived anywhere.
That's a lot.
Crazy. So yeah, I think time to move on and focus on teaching still. I really, both in jiu-jitsu and then at the university, I really appreciate teaching. So looking for a role doing that and just using my knowledge to continue to help people.
Love that. Anything that you want to promote? I know you had said you wanted to talk about the Our Racism podcast really briefly. Anything else that you want to, that and anything else you want to promote?
Yeah, since, you're based in Germany, I want to give a shout out to Fumi Kuwahara, who is a great friend of mine who has now taken a brief pause for the Our Racism podcast, but that is a really good way to listen to people's stories around the world. And when we talk about like being open to other cultures and perspectives, really understand what people have gone through. Some fascinating stories there. I think we talked about sportagration. So if people are in Switzerland listening to this, get involved with sportagration. For any veterans who are listening to this, if you're going to school or thinking about going to school, Student Veterans of America, if you are active duty or a veteran or jiu-jitsu person and I can help you in any way, shape, or form, feel free to reach out. And I think that's it.
Yeah, I'll put all of those things in the show notes. If somebody wants to find you on Instagram, Cap on Earth. And like I said, I'll put all of these links and all of the things that you've mentioned in the show notes. Christian,
Awesome.
This was a super fun conversation. I really appreciate the authenticity and the depth that we hit. And I really enjoyed getting to know about your PhD. So thank you.
Likewise. Thanks for your time, Eric. It's been a really, really cool conversation.
Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about transitioning out of the U.S. military or what it's like at West Point, feel free to reach out to Christian. If you find yourself near Zurich, Switzerland, message him to see where he'll be training. You can find his contact information in the show notes. And as always, thank you for your time and attention.